There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to Norfolk in the early morning. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of something vast and patient, 10,000 acres of wheat and barley and sugar beet stretching flat to the horizon, breathing slowly under a gray October sky. Rooks lift from the hedgerows in slow black spirals. A tractor moves somewhere far away, its engine a low hum beneath everything, like a heartbeat. Thomas Hewitt has heard this silence every morning for 40 years. He stands at the edge of the field the way he always does, one boot up on the lowest rung of the fence, both forearms resting on the top bar, eyes moving across the crop the way a doctor reads a patient's face. He is 63 years old. His hands are the color and texture of the bark on an old oak tree. He has worked this particular stretch of Norfolk farmland since he was 22, when the previous owner hired him for what was meant to be a single harvest season, and somehow never got around to letting him go. In 40 years, Thomas has watched this land fed and starved and pushed and rested. He has watched the soil change color across the decades, darkening when it was healthy, paling when the chemicals came in too heavy, turning a shade of exhausted gray in the years when the pressure to produce more, faster, cheaper, at any cost, became something no field could reasonably be expected to absorb. He does not say any of this out loud. Thomas Hewitt is not a man who says things out loud unless absolutely necessary. But he knows what healthy soil smells like. He has known since he was a boy, crouching beside his grandfather in a garden in Fakenham, pushing his fingers into the dark earth and breathing in something alive and ancient and full of quiet promise. For a long time, this field did not smell like that anymore. That is what this story is about, what it takes to bring a smell back. And it begins, as so many unexpected things begin, with a drone the size of a dinner table and a retired farmer who learned to fly it from YouTube tutorials at the age of 68. The morning Thomas notices the convoy of vehicles turning off the B1105 onto the farm track. It is just past 8 o'clock. 3 dark cars, a white Land Rover with official plates, a small cluster of people in high visibility vests already waiting at the gate, clipboards in hand, breath fogging in the cold air. He watches them arrive the way he watches everything, steadily, without hurry, without particular expression. Somewhere above the eastern field, a drone lifts into the gray Norfolk sky. Prince William has arrived. The woman who started all of this does not look like someone who started anything. Margaret Calloway is 34 years old, and she has the practical, slightly distracted air of someone whose mind is always running 3 conversations ahead of the one she is currently having. She grew up 12 miles from this farm, in a village called Burnham Thorpe, the same village, she will tell anyone who asks, where Admiral Horatio Nelson was born, though she admits the connection has never done her much practical good. She left Norfolk at 18 on a full scholarship to study agricultural science at the University of Reading. She was, by every measurable standard, exceptional. Her professors said so. The research laboratory in Cambridge that hired her afterwards said so. The journal that published her paper on soil microbiome recovery at the age of 27 said so in print, which is the kind of thing that makes a person's mother cry at the kitchen table in the best possible way. She came back to Norfolk at 31. People asked her why. She found the question difficult to answer without sounding either sentimental or slightly mad. The simplest version of the truth was this. She had spent years studying what was wrong with agricultural soil in a laboratory, and she had decided she wanted to spend the next years trying to fix it in an actual field. The field she chose was this one. The farmer who owned it, a quietly desperate man named Gerald Hastings, who had been fighting falling yields and rising chemical costs for the better part of a decade, agreed to let her run her program on 40 acres of his least productive land, largely because he had run out of better ideas and Margaret had spoken to him plainly and without condescension, which he found unusual enough to be persuasive. That was 3 years ago. Margaret's program was built on a straightforward principle: reduce synthetic fertilizer inputs systematically, rebuild soil biology through precision application of organic compounds, and map every inch of the process using aerial drone technology to track change across the entire field, rather than relying on the handful of soil samples that conventional practice allowed. The drone element was the part she had not yet figured out when she arrived. That is where David came in. David Ackafer is 71 years old, and he will tell you himself, with considerable satisfaction, that he is the least likely drone pilot in the county of Norfolk. He farmed the neighboring property for 35 years, wheat, oilseed rape, some livestock, before his knees made the physical demands of daily farm work genuinely untenable, and he handed the operation to his son. He had expected retirement to suit him. It did not. He lasted 4 months before the inactivity began to make him unreasonable, which his wife Patricia noted with increasing frequency and diminishing diplomacy. He had seen a documentary about agricultural drones on television. He had found the concept interesting. He had, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, typed the words, "How to fly a drone for farming beginners," into a YouTube search bar. And what followed was 18 months of self-directed, obsessive, frequently maddening, ultimately masterful learning that his son describes as the most alarming thing Dad has ever done. And Dad once fixed the combine harvester with a piece of wire and a prayer. But David did not merely learn to fly drones. He learned the software. He learned the mapping systems. He learned how to program flight paths that covered maximum ground with minimum battery use. And then, because the available flight path systems frustrated him with their inefficiency, he began to modify them, writing his own mapping protocols in a notebook first, then transferring them to the software with the help of a patient online forum and his own formidable stubbornness. When Margaret approached him, on the recommendation of a local agricultural supplies merchant who had witnessed David argue a drone software developer into silent, blinking acknowledgement at a county fair, he listened to her proposal for 20 minutes, asked 4 precise questions, and said, "Right, when do we start?" The flight path system the entire program now runs on is David's. Margaret calls it elegant. David calls it basically common sense, which turns out to be rarer than you'd think. Aisha Patel is 17 years old. She is a 6th form student at a comprehensive school in Kings Lynn, and she has been interested in soil science since she was 12, which she acknowledges is not a common sentence for a 12-year-old to be able to honestly complete. Her interest began with a school project on food security, deepened through a library book she found by accident while looking for something else entirely, and became a genuine passion that she has since learned to mention selectively in social situations. She heard about Margaret's project through a county agricultural education initiative and asked, by email, whether she might visit and observe. Margaret replied within an hour and offered her a role. Aisha's contribution to the program is a soil testing protocol she developed herself using second-hand laboratory equipment sourced from eBay, a school science budget of £200, and a methodology she constructed by reading 14 peer-reviewed papers across 8 months and cross-referencing their findings until a pattern emerged that none of them had individually stated, but all of them collectively implied. Her data on soil bacterial recovery rates across the 40-acre trial plot is, according to Margaret, the most granular and consistent dataset the program has produced. According to 2 professors at the University of East Anglia who have since reviewed it, it is publishable. According to Aisha, it is probably fine, I think. I'm not entirely sure. She is, on the morning of Prince William's visit, wearing a waterproof jacket 2 sizes too large, borrowed from her father. She is holding a clipboard so tightly that her knuckles have gone pale. She has rehearsed what she wants to say 11 times in the car on the way here. She is extraordinary, and she does not yet fully know it. These are the 3 people who changed 40 acres of exhausted Norfolk farmland. A scientist who came home, a retired farmer who refused to stop, a teenager who asked a question nobody else thought to ask. The official itinerary had the drone demonstration scheduled for 9:15. David launched at 9:12 because David does not believe in waiting when everything is already ready and the battery is already charged and the sky is, in his professional assessment, adequately cooperative. The drone rose from the grass at the field's edge with a sound like a very determined kitchen appliance. A high, purposeful whir that caused two nearby journalists to step back instinctively, and one rook to express its displeasure loudly from a distant fence post. Prince William stood with his hands clasped behind his back and watched it rise with the expression of a man who is genuinely interested and making no effort whatsoever to pretend otherwise. He had been briefed on the program during the car journey from Sandringham. He had read the summary documents the night before. He had arrived, his aide noted privately, with the kind of prepared curiosity that is entirely different from the performed curiosity that royal visits sometimes require. The sort that asks real questions and actually waits for the answers. David held the controller with the steady, unhurried competence of a man who has done this hundreds of times in weather considerably worse than this. He walked William through the flight path, how the drone mapped the field in parallel passes, how the multispectral camera beneath it read crop health data invisible to the human eye, how the software translated those readings into precise prescription maps that told Margaret exactly where to apply what, in what quantities, at what time. William asked how long a single field survey took. David said, depends on the field. This one about 22 minutes. William asked what they did before drones. David said, guessed mostly. Expensive guessing, mind you. We called it agronomic assessment and charged accordingly. William laughed, a real laugh, sudden and genuine, the kind that doesn't give itself time to be dignified. The drone completed its first pass beautifully. It turned at the field boundary with the smooth precision of something that has no ego invested in the turn and therefore executes it perfectly. It began its second pass. It completed the second pass. It began the third. And then, for reasons that David later described as completely inexplicable and frankly embarrassing, the drone made a navigational decision that was not in any flight path David had programmed. It came back. Specifically, it came back to where Prince William was standing, reduced its altitude to approximately 4 feet above his head, and hovered there with an air of complete confidence, its rotors generating a focused downdraft that ruffled William's hair in a direction it had not previously been pointing. There was a moment of absolute silence. William looked up. The drone looked, insofar as a piece of agricultural technology can look back down. David said very quietly, "I apologize, sir." William said, "Is it meant to do that?" David said, "Absolutely not." The laughter that followed started with the junior members of the team and moved through the assembled group in a wave, reaching the more senior officials last and reluctantly. William's shoulders were shaking. He waved a hand at David to indicate that no further apology was necessary, which David accepted with the dignified relief of a man who has decided to find the whole thing funny rather than mortifying. Margaret, standing to William's left, said under her breath, "It's never done that before." Aisha, standing to Margaret's right, said, also under her breath, "It did it to the university professor last month." Margaret turned to look at her. Aisha said, "I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure it was relevant." David brought the drone back to Earth, checked every setting with the thoroughness of someone conducting a serious investigation, found nothing wrong with any of them, and relaunched. The drone performed flawlessly for the remaining 19 minutes of the survey. It did not hover over anyone. It did not express any further opinions about William's hair. It did, on landing, settle into David's outstretched hands with a gentleness that was almost affectionate. William watched this and said, "It clearly just prefers you." David said, "Most sensible things do." Margaret had prepared a presentation. It was clear and well-structured and contained several excellent charts, and William listened to it politely for approximately 4 minutes before he said, "Could we just walk the field?" Which was, Margaret later admitted, exactly the right request at exactly the right moment. They walked. Margaret talked as they moved, not from her notes, but from 3 years of daily, ground-level knowledge that no chart can fully carry. She talked about the 40-acre trial plot and the 40 acres of conventionally managed land beside it, run in parallel so every variable could be compared directly. She talked about what she had found in year 1. Soil so compacted and chemically saturated that earthworm populations had collapsed to almost nothing. Beneficial bacterial colonies reduced to a fraction of what healthy agricultural soil should sustain. She talked about what the drone data had shown her, not just where the crop was struggling, but why, and specifically, and differently in different parts of the same field, which is the kind of nuance that a single soil sample taken from a single corner cannot possibly reveal. She talked about the prescription maps, the precise, variable rate application plans that replaced the blanket fertilizer treatments the field had received for years. 70 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare in this section, where the soil showed depletion. 40 in this section, where bacterial activity was recovering. 20 in this corner, where the data suggested the soil needed less chemistry and more time. The numbers told a story that 3 years of meticulous, unglamorous work had earned the right to tell. Synthetic fertilizer use across the trial plot was down 41% compared to the conventionally managed land beside it. Yield was down less than 3%, within the margin that Gerald Hastings, the farmer, had agreed at the outset was acceptable if it was accompanied by genuine soil recovery. Soil organic matter was up. Earthworm populations were returning. The wild bee colonies that Margaret had been quietly monitoring along the field, margins had stabilized after 2 years of documented decline. William stopped walking. He crouched down at the edge of a crop row, pressed 2 fingers into the soil, and lifted a small, dark handful. He turned it in his palm. He did not say anything for a moment. He was doing the thing that people who actually care about land do, reading it, not performing it. He said, "What does recovered soil smell like?" Margaret crouched beside him, which her press officer noted was not in the briefing document, but which felt, in the moment, like the only reasonable response. She said like this, "What you're smelling right now. Petrichor, that's the formal name for it, but farmers just call it good earth." William smelled it. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when something confirms something they already half knew, but hadn't found the right evidence for yet. He said, "And the field next to this one." Margaret said, "Doesn't smell like this." He stood up and looked across the boundary line between the trial plot and the conventionally managed land beside it. The difference was not dramatic to an untrained eye, but it was there, a subtle difference in the depth of color in the soil, in the evenness of the crop canopy, in something almost atmospheric that was difficult to name, but impossible to entirely miss once someone had pointed you toward it. He stood there for a moment, longer than the schedule allowed. Nobody mentioned the schedule. There is a particular way that expertise announces itself in a room or in a field. It doesn't shout. It doesn't carry a presentation. It sits quietly in the corner, saying practical things in plain language, and you only realize afterward that everything intelligent that happened in the past hour ran through it. The visit was 45 minutes old before William asked the question that had been forming since David's opening explanation of the flight path system. He said, "The mapping protocol, it's more sophisticated than anything I've seen in the briefing documents. Who designed it?" Margaret said, "David did." William looked at David. David said, "I had a lot of time on my hands." There was a beat. William said, "Walk me through it." What followed was 20 minutes that nobody who was present will fully forget, though most of them would struggle to explain afterward exactly why. David walked William through the logic of the flight path system, the way a craftsman walks someone through a piece of work, not boasting, not performing, just explaining the problem as he had found it and the solution as he had arrived at it, step by step, in the plain and precise language of someone who built something because it needed building and has no particular interest in being impressive about it. The commercially available mapping systems, David explained, were designed for large, regular fields on flat terrain. Norfolk fields are large, but they are not always regular, and their drainage patterns create micro-variations in soil condition that a standard grid pattern flight path misses entirely because it doesn't know to look for them. David had looked at the drainage maps of this particular farm, maps that existed, he noted, because a drainage engineer had drawn them by hand in 1987 and filed them in a folder that nobody had opened since, and redesigned the flight paths to follow the field's actual hydrological logic rather than an imposed geometric pattern. The result was a survey system that captured soil condition data at a resolution that Margaret's laboratory analysis confirmed was significantly more accurate than the standard approach. The prescription maps it produced were correspondingly more precise. The fertilizer reductions were correspondingly more effective. The system that was producing the 41% reduction in chemical inputs was running on a flight path designed by a 71-year-old retired farmer who had found a folder of hand-drawn drainage maps in a filing cabinet and understood immediately why they mattered. William was quiet for a moment after David finished. He said, "And the software companies, have you shown them this?" David said, "I've spoken to 2 of them. They were polite." He said this with the precise intonation of a man for whom "they were polite" means something considerably more than it appears to. William said, "I'd like to help with that if you'd let me." David considered this for a moment with the unhurried seriousness he brings to everything. He said that would be useful, yes. Margaret, who had been standing slightly behind them both, exhaled a breath she had been holding for a perceptible length of time. Data from a second-hand kit. Aisha had been rearranging her clipboard for the better part of 40 minutes. Not because anything on it needed rearranging, because her hands needed something to do while she waited for the moment that she had prepared for and was now, as it approached, finding considerably more terrifying than it had seemed in the car on the way here. Margaret brought William to her with the simple, direct introduction of someone who has learned that the best way to present exceptional work is to present it without excessive preamble. She said, "This is Aisha Patel. She's in her second year of 6th form, and she has produced the best soil recovery dataset we have." William extended his hand. Aisha shook it. Her grip was firm. Her father had told her that morning to make sure her grip was firm, and she had decided this was the one piece of advice she would definitely follow. She walked him through her data. She had set up a small display on a folding table at the field margin, printed charts, and a laptop showing the visualized dataset, because she had learned from watching Margaret that data lands differently when people can see it rather than just hear it. She had spent 2 evenings designing the visualizations to be readable by someone who was not a soil scientist, which is a harder design problem than it sounds. She explained the methodology first, the sampling grid she had established across the trial plot, the testing protocol she had developed, the measurement intervals she had maintained across 18 months of consistent weekly visits to this field in weather that had included, she noted with the restraint of someone choosing not to dwell on it, 2 genuinely unpleasant February mornings, and 1 hailstorm that had destroyed her first set of sample labels and required her to reconstruct them from memory. She showed him the bacterial colony data, the slow, stubborn, month-by-month recovery of soil biology across the trial plot, compared to the flatline readings from the conventionally managed land beside it. She showed him the earthworm transect data, counts per square meter, plotted over time, showing the curve of return that looked on the graph exactly like what it was, life coming back. She showed him the correlation analysis she had run between David's precision application maps and her bacterial recovery readings. The finding that the areas of the field that had received the most targeted, reduced input treatment showed the fastest biological recovery, which confirmed the program's central premise with the kind of quiet, data-based certainty that is more persuasive than any argument. William asked 2 questions. The first was about the correlation methodology, specifically, whether she had controlled for natural variation in soil drainage as an independent variable. It was a sharp question. It was the question that one of the UEA professors had also asked, and she had spent 2 weeks developing the answer. She gave him the answer. He nodded slowly, following it. The second question was simpler. He said, "How long have you been interested in this?" She said, "Since I was 12. I found a book in the library by accident." He said, "What book?" She told him. He said, "I don't know it, but I'd like to." And then he said something that she has not repeated to many people, not because it was private, but because it is the kind of thing that sits in a particular place inside a person and is difficult to translate into ordinary conversation without losing something essential in the transfer. What he said was this, that the work she had done with second-hand equipment on a student's budget in her own time across 18 months of weekly visits to a muddy field in Norfolk was exactly the kind of work that changes things, not because it was impressive, though it was, but because it was real, because it existed, because she had decided it should exist and then made it exist, which is the only way anything that matters ever gets made. Aisha Patel, who is 17 years old and not in the habit of poor posture, straightened her spine. She did not slouch again that day. People who know her suggest she has not slouched since. Thomas Hewitt does not attend events. This is not a philosophical position. It is simply a practical one. Events, in Thomas's experience, are for people who have things to say to other people. And Thomas has spent 40 years developing a working relationship with this land that has never once required him to attend anything. He watched the morning unfold from his customary position at the fence, the presentations, the drone flight, the field walk, the folding table with Aisha's charts. He watched it all with the steady, evaluative attention he gives to everything that happens on this farm, which is the attention of someone who has seen enough seasons to know that what a thing looks like and what a thing is are frequently different propositions. He had seen agricultural initiatives come and go. He had seen consultants with folders and researchers with sampling kits and technology salespeople with very confident presentations, and he had watched most of them leave the field more or less unchanged by what they found here, which is the particular tragedy of expertise that does not first learn to listen. These 3 were different. He had understood that within the first week of the program, when he had watched Margaret crouch in the field margin for 20 minutes, studying something at ground level that most people would have walked past without breaking stride. When he had watched David Acaffer sit in his car for an hour with a set of old drainage maps spread across the steering wheel, frowning at them with the focused intensity of a man conducting a serious negotiation. When he had watched a 16-year-old girl arrive alone on a Saturday morning with a bag of sampling equipment and work for 3 hours in the rain without complaint and leave with her samples labeled, and her notebook full and her expression one of genuine satisfaction, that had told him something. He had not said any of this to anyone. Thomas Hewitt does not narrate his conclusions. He simply adjusts his assessment and continues. He was not expecting Prince William to walk over to him. The visit was drawing toward its close. The formal part had concluded. The group was moving back toward the farm gate. William was walking slightly apart from the main cluster, his hands in his pockets, looking out across the field with the expression of someone processing something privately. He saw Thomas at the fence. He changed direction. He walked across the grass verge to where Thomas was standing, leaned his forearms on the top bar of the fence, finding, without appearing to look for it, the same position Thomas had occupied all morning and said, "You've been here the longest." It was not a question. Thomas said, 40 years in April. William looked out at the field. He said, "What was it like before?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked at the crop. He said, "Gray." William waited. Thomas said, "Soil went gray. When you push the chemistry too hard for too long, the color goes. Most people don't notice because they're not looking for it, but it goes." William said, "And now?" Thomas looked at the field for a long moment. He said, "It's coming back." There was a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences between people who are both genuinely attending to the same thing can sometimes be. William said, "Did you think it would?" Thomas said, "I thought it could. Didn't know if anyone would let it." He said this without any particular emphasis. It was simply the truth, stated plainly, in the way that 40 years of watching a thing gives a person the right to state it. William nodded. He stayed at the fence for another minute. He did not check his phone. He did not look back at the group. He looked at the field. Then he said, "Thank you, Thomas," and walked back toward the gate. Thomas watched him go. He turned back to the field. The rooks had come back to the far hedgerow. The sky had lightened slightly, not to blue, because it was October in Norfolk, and the sky does not commit to blue in October, but to a brighter shade of gray, which is its own kind of generosity. Thomas put his boot back on the bottom rung of the fence. The official farewells took place at the farm gate at 11:43. Gerald Hastings, the farmer who had agreed to let 40 of his worst acres become an experiment 3 years ago, shook William's hand with the grip of a man who has spent a lifetime doing physical work and has strong feelings about handshakes. He said that the program had given him something he hadn't expected when he signed up for it, which was the first genuinely optimistic conversation he'd had about the future of the farm in about a decade. William said he hoped there would be more of those. Gerald said, "There will be if they'll let these 3 actually get on with it." William said he would do what he could to make sure of that. This was not a politician's promise. It had the texture of something more specific, which Gerald, who has spent enough years dealing with various types of official assurances to know the difference, noted with quiet satisfaction. Margaret shook William's hand and then, because she is Margaret Calloway and formality has always been slightly foreign to her natural operating mode, immediately followed the handshake with a direct, unhesitating request for his office to support a funding application to expand the program to 3 additional farms in the county. She had the details on a single page, which she produced from her jacket pocket with the speed of someone who had positioned it there very deliberately that morning. William took the page. He read it, actually read it, standing at the farm gate, which took 90 seconds that nobody timed but everyone noticed. He folded it and put it in his inside pocket. He said, "I'll read this properly tonight and call you next week." Margaret said, "Tuesday or Wednesday would be ideal." He said, "I'll see what I can do." She said Tuesday would be better. He smiled and moved on, and the small crowd of aides and officials around him absorbed the moment with the practiced invisibility of people, accustomed to navigating the gap between protocol and reality. David Ockhaffer was standing with the drone cased and packed, because David does not leave equipment out any longer than necessary. William shook his hand and said, "I meant what I said earlier about the software companies. I'd like to follow up." David said, "I'll send you the technical summary. It's 43 pages." William said, "Send me all of it." David said, "It's quite technical." William said, "Send me all of it." David looked at him for a moment with the evaluative directness of a man who spent 35 years reading weather and soil and animals, and has since extended that skill to people. He said, "Right, I will." The drone at this moment made its final appearance. David had set the case down to shake William's hand, and the lid was not fully latched, and a gust of Norfolk wind asserted, unhurried and entirely uninterested in official schedules, lifted the lid and caught the drone's rotors. And for one brief, implausible moment, the drone rose approximately 18 inches into the air, hovered with the exact same composure it had displayed above William's head 3 hours earlier, and settled back into the case. The silence lasted 2 seconds. William said, "It just wanted to say goodbye." David said, "With the dignity of a man who has decided this is simply the drone's personality, apparently." The laughter that followed was the loose, genuine kind that happens at the end of something real, not polished or performed, but the natural exhalation of a group of people who have spent a morning doing something that mattered and are now standing in the cold Norfolk air feeling, without quite having words for it, that the morning was worth the getting up for. Aisha was the last person William spoke to before he got in the car. She had stood back slightly during the farewells, not from shyness, exactly, but from the instinct of someone who does not assume she belongs in the front row of anything. William walked to where she was standing. He said, "Keep going with the data." She said, "I will." He said, "And apply for the agricultural science program at Edinburgh. Margaret told me you've been thinking about it." Aisha looked at Margaret, who was studying the middle distance with the concentrated attention of someone determined not to appear involved. She looked back at William. She said, "I wasn't sure I was ready." He said, "The data says you are." She did not have an answer for that. She nodded. She shook his hand again. She watched him walk to the car. She stood at the field margin for a long moment after the cars had turned back onto the B1105, and the sound of the engines had faded into the general October quiet. Then she took out her notebook and wrote something in it. She has not said what she wrote, but the Edinburgh application was submitted the following month. The Land Rover disappeared around the bend in the farm track, and the sound of it was gone within 30 seconds, absorbed by the hedgerows and the flat distance, the way this landscape absorbs everything, without ceremony, without comment, with the patient indifference of something that has been here considerably longer than any of the things that pass through it. Thomas Hewitt turned back to the field. He had watched the whole morning from his fence post, and he had spoken to the man who would be king for approximately 4 minutes, and he had said what he had to say, which was not very much, but was accurate, which in his experience is worth more than a great deal that is extensive but imprecise. He thought about what he had told William, about the soil going gray, about not knowing if anyone would let it recover. He thought about Margaret crouching in the field margin 3 years ago, staring at something small and important at ground level. He thought about David in his car with the old drainage maps. He thought about a 16-year-old arriving alone in the rain with her sampling equipment and leaving 3 hours later with her notebook full. He thought about what it takes to bring a smell back to a piece of land. It does not take a single dramatic intervention. It does not happen because of a visit, however well-intentioned, by someone important. It does not respond to gestures. It responds to consistency, to the same pair of hands returning, week after week, season after season, making small adjustments based on careful observation, asking what the land needs rather than telling it what it should produce. What happened in this field happened because 3 people showed up and kept showing up, in the rain and the cold, and the discouraging early months when the data showed almost nothing, and the soil looked the same gray it had always been. And there was no particular reason to believe that anything was changing beneath the surface, except the stubborn logic of the process itself. Real change does not descend from above. It rises from the ground up slowly in the dark, before anyone is watching, one field at a time. Thomas pushed himself off the fence with the unhurried movement of a man who has a full afternoon of work ahead and no particular anxiety about it. He picked up the equipment bag he had set down at the start of the morning. He walked back toward the farm buildings along the field margin, his boots finding the dry line along the edge the way they always do, the same path, worn to familiarity across 40 years. Behind him, the field lay quiet under the October sky. Somewhere in the soil, in the dark beneath the crop roots, in the slow and purposeful dark that neither the visiting cars, nor the drone cameras, nor the official briefing documents had any access to, something was happening that had been happening for 3 years and would continue happening long after this particular morning was a memory. The earthworms were moving. The bacteria were building. The field smelled faintly, like good earth.